Hey everyone, hope you're having a good weekend. We're going to do something a little different in today's video. I feel very fortunate and I consider this a special video. I was contacted maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago by a gentleman who was writing a book. He was kind enough to send me the first chapter of his book and let me read it. And his book has gone live on Kindle. The full complete book is live on Kindle. I'm going to link it below, but I asked him if he would mind if I read the first few paragraphs of this book for you guys, hopefully to get you interested and get a little publicity for his book. And the title of his book is The White Mountain Bigfoot. The author's name is Bobby Clark. He's just a super nice guy, and he's written a great book. It went live, I think, late last week. He sent me the link and I instantly bought the book, and I've read the whole thing, and it's an exciting, well-written, sort of a novella, and it's just a great story, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to share with you the first few paragraphs of that book. This video is about 20 minutes long, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the first few paragraphs of The White Mountain Bigfoot by Bobby Clark. All right, here we go. Chapter 1. The heat waves rose from the desert floor in waves as I rode along, sweat staining my shirt. I was weary to the bone, the wound in my side from the Apache arrow still fresh and oozing blood despite my attempts to plug the hole. The only thing I wanted more than to crawl in a hole and sleep was to live. The dust trail, no more than 2 miles back, was evidence that despite my best efforts, Lone Wolf and his band of renegade warriors were still on my trail. The slosh of water in my canteen was a painful reminder of just how little water I had, and it was still 20 miles until the nearest water that I knew of. I stopped in the partial shade of a boulder and sponged Blackie's nostrils out with my handkerchief. I was a day and a half out of a small mining town of Oracle, Arizona, when the arrow hit me from behind, low down on my right side. It was just a flesh wound, but I had lost a lot of blood over the next 4 hours of running and fighting before I was able to stop and properly bandage my wound. I knew that if it had not been for Blackie, I would be dead by now. Blackie was a 3-year-old Appaloosa that I had traded for a little over a year ago from an old Navajo horse breeder, the best horse I ever had. He was stumbling now from exhaustion, and I knew we had to find a place to rest out of the heat. A canyon opened to my right, and taking a chance, I took it. I hoped it was not a dead end. A narrow game trail led along the bottom. It was about 300 yards across at the opening and gradually narrowed as I rode deeper into the canyon. After about a mile of twisting and turning, it had narrowed to about 50 yards, and there was a dry creek bed to my left as I continued to follow the faint trail. The heat was stifling between the canyon walls. No sensible man or beast would be out in this heat, but the Apaches left me little choice. I was beginning to have trouble focusing. The lack of water was starting to tell on me. My eyes felt like they were full of sand and my tongue was swollen. The trail was narrow and little used, or was the trail becoming more well-worn? I was swaying in the saddle and having a hard time focusing. I was sure I had a fever as well, but in this heat it was hard to tell. Suddenly, I realized that I had been smelling a putrid stench that had been growing stronger for several minutes as I rode along. Blackie was growing more and more uneasy as we rounded a corner in the canyon. The canyon walls were sheer and unclimbable at this point and had narrowed to only a few yards apart. It was deathly still in the canyon. Not the slightest hint of a breeze. The trail had become a mere ledge hugging tightly to the canyon wall on my right. And to my left, the dry creek bed was 100 feet below, and my left stirrup was hanging over the edge of the trail while my right rubbed the red canyon wall. I had a feeling like someone had just stepped on my grave. I wanted to turn around and leave, but even if the Apaches had not been behind me, there was nowhere to turn around. Blackie snorted uneasily as he gingerly continued up the trail that was growing steeper. My fuzzy thoughts were grappling with the horrible smell, but I could not place it. The trail cut between some boulders and turned sharply back to the right again. Suddenly, Blackie's iron shoes slipped on the steep rocky surface. Scrambling to get his footing, we slid closer to the edge. A rock finally gave way, and we went over the edge. I was too sick and weak to think clearly enough to kick free. Blackie's feet had gotten tangled in some small brush growing at the edge of the trail as we went over, turning us upside down. We had only fallen a few feet when I slammed into a boulder, nearly knocking me unconscious. I slid down to the base of the boulder with my left side against the mountain and my right against the boulder. Blackie landed on top of me, wedged upside down between the boulder and the mountain. The only thing saving me from being crushed by his weight was the wedge-shaped gap preventing his full weight from resting on me. He was thrashing and kicking and trying to free himself, but was only sliding further down into the crack with each kick. The weight on my chest was so great that I could barely breathe, and I was sure that the saddle horn had broken some ribs. The pain was nearly unbearable as Blackie continued to struggle, trying to free himself. The saddle horn grinding into my chest with each futile kick Blackie made. I was about to black out from the pain and the inability to breathe when a shadow appeared above me. The stench was so great that it made the already difficult job of breathing even harder. I was sure that I was going to die. If not from the weight of the horse, then from the Apaches that I thought had caught up with me. I tried to reach my gun, but my arms were pinned at my sides. Suddenly, Blackie stopped struggling. I became aware of a deep guttural grunt. I had never heard anything like it. I strained my neck to look up past Blackie's head, and what I saw turned my blood cold and made me wish the Apaches had caught up with me. The face was human in a way, but much larger, with deep-set black eyes under a massive, sloping forehead. A short, flat nose, a huge mouth with yellowed teeth. There was no apparent neck, but what I saw of the beast was the broadest set of muscular shoulders I had ever imagined, and with long, muscular arms. The beast was massive, covered in 2-inch long, coarse black hair, except for its face and its hands. He stood there looking at me as I looked back. Suddenly, I realized there was a second beast. The beast grunted once more and then reached down and wrapped its massive hands around Blackie's 2 front legs and began lifting. As the weight lifted off of me, I took a huge shuddering breath, immediately regretting it from the burst of pain in my chest and from my broken ribs. As Blackie was lifted free, I realized the second beast had lifted Blackie by his hind legs. Blackie was set on the trail where I heard him scramble to his feet. I lay there stunned, wondering if my fever was causing me to hallucinate or if this was even real. Suddenly, the first beast returned to the edge and looked down at me. I lay there, too stunned to hurt. The beast jumped down next to me and gently lifted me like a small child. Straightening, he handed me up to the second beast that I recognized as a female. Blackie was standing on the trail, trembling but apparently unhurt. The female was holding me like a small child and began walking up the trail, while the male led Blackie along behind. Somewhere along about there I must have passed out, because when I awoke next, it was pitch dark, and I was laying on what seemed to be a pile of animal skins. I lay there, unmoving, trying to get my bearings. As the memories flooded back, I was sure I had been dreaming. I must still be dreaming. There was no way what I had seen was real. Suddenly I heard a noise. Turning my head to my left, I saw a sliver of light. It must be coming from under a curtain of some sort. The curtain moved, and I realized I had not been dreaming. The silhouette of a slightly smaller female was framed in the opening against the light of a small fire. I was in a cave of sorts. I had no idea how long I had been there. The female hooked the curtain over a stick that was stuck in the crack in the wall. She came in and stood there staring down at me. It was too dark to see her expression. I lay there wondering what was next. I was afraid to move. She reached over and took my canteen off the ledge on the wall and offered it to me. Suddenly realizing how thirsty I was, I carefully accepted it. To my amazement, the canteen was full. I had no idea where the beast had filled it. So far as I knew, there were still 20 miles from the nearest water. At this point, I was not complaining. I was just grateful for the water. I drank my fill and then lay back and rested. I must have dozed off because when I woke next, there was a little bit of natural light coming into the outer room. I tried to roll over and sit up, but the pain in my chest stopped me, as did the pain in my left leg. Gingerly, I felt of my leg. There were 2 splints, one on each side below my knee, and tied in place by rawhide strings. So I had broken a leg as well. It seemed to be a good job of setting the bone. I lay there wondering what was going to happen next. I was starving. It had been 2 days. Well, it had been 2 days since I had eaten before Blackie had fallen on me. I was not sure how long I had been here. I began dragging myself across the cave floor towards the fire. The beasts were there, and there was a young one. The young one appeared to be a teenager and was about my size. I stand 6 feet in my socks when I have any. I drug myself a little further into the room. There was a second, much smaller beast that was only a youngster asleep on a deer hide against the wall. They just sat there watching me curiously. I took in the room, sizing it up. What I could see of it was about 30 feet wide and twice that long. The ceiling was about 12 feet high and blackened by many fires. There were pictures painted on the walls, some crude and apparently done with charcoal. Others were quite good and of several different colors. There was a decent supply of firewood against the wall. No sign of an axe or saw marks. The larger pieces were about the size of my calf and appeared to be broken to length. I was amazed at the sheer size of the adults. The male had to be at least 9 feet tall, while the female was about 8 feet tall. They just watched me curiously as I drug myself further into the room. It was then that I noticed, hanging from a sharpened stick driven into a crack in the wall, a freshly killed skinned deer carcass. My stomach was trying to tell me that it thought my throat had been cut in the fall. I felt at my side and realized that my knife was still in its sheath, as was my gun. Still, the beast had not made a move. They just sat watching me, deciding that I was going to die from starvation if I did not do something. I pointed at the deer and asked, "Can I have some?" The beasts just looked at me. I grunted and pointed again at the deer. Again, they just looked at me. I began slowly dragging myself across the cave floor towards the deer carcass. I had to stop and rest twice before making it the 15 feet or so across the floor to where the deer was hanging. I took out my knife, I was too weak to stand, and cut off a large piece. Impaling it on my knife blade, I began dragging myself back across the floor towards the fire. Almost too hungry to wait, but not yet hungry enough to eat raw flesh, I began roasting the meat over the fire. The beasts still just sat there watching me. My leg was throbbing, and my chest hurt every time I took a breath. I was beginning to feel many more bruises and sore spots than I had originally thought I had. But the only serious ones were the leg and chest. Suddenly remembering the wound in my side, I pulled my shirt up to take a look. There was a strange bandage made from animal skins and some type of herbal poultice on the wound. The redness that had surrounded it was much better, and it did not hurt as bad. The smell of the roasting meat was too much for me. It burned my mouth eating the half-cooked meat. Still, the beast just sat there against the wall watching me curiously as I ate. Finished with the meat, I was exhausted. I was still hungry and felt much better, but I did not have the strength to go back for more. I looked towards my bed in the back room, and I knew I did not have the strength to get there either. I laid my head down on my outstretched arm, trying to get comfortable on the hard, cold floor. The large male got up and carefully picked me up and carried me back to my bed. I was almost immediately asleep. When I awakened again, it was almost completely dark in the room. Looking towards the fire, I could see a few glowing embers. There were snoring sounds coming from somewhere deeper in the cave. I lay there thinking about what a strange situation I was in. I had heard of stories of the big people as a kid, but I never believed them. I must have fallen asleep again because when I awoke, the next fire was blazing, and I could hear what sounded like an armful of firewood being dropped against the wall. I took a long drink from my refilled canteen and began the long crawl back to the deer hanging on the wall. This process repeated itself for several days as I got stronger. Every couple of days there was a fresh deer or antelope hanging on the wall. After about 2 weeks I was able to hobble around with a makeshift crutch. Not sure if the beast would let me leave or not, I limped towards the light at the cave opening, curious about what was outside. I had not seen Blackie, and I was worried about him. I wondered briefly if the beast had eaten him. Rounding a corner, I could see a hand-woven mat hanging over the opening. Hearing a noise, I turned to see the male standing about 10 feet behind me. He did not appear threatening, but just stood there watching me. I continued slowly to the mat. Moving it aside, I stepped carefully out into the prettiest little desert oasis I had ever seen. A cottonwood-lined creek ran through the middle, its source coming out from under the sheer rock walls on one side and disappearing under it on the other side. Green grass grew in the bottom of the meadow. Blackie was grazing contently on the grass. There were about 40 acres that I could see, and there were about 100 head of mixed deer and antelope grazing on the meadow grass. I was speechless. I would never have guessed such a beautiful place existed in this area. I sat down on a rock and I pondered my situation. I could not ride yet, although I was getting stronger by the day. The question was, would the beasts let me leave, or did they have other plans for me? I went back inside, carefully replacing the mat, and cooked another fresh venison steak over a crackling fire, and I shared it with the black-haired youngster. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. Bobby, thank you for giving me permission to narrate this first chapter. Again, I think anybody who reads the whole book will thoroughly enjoy it. Go to his Kindle page. It's linked below in the description. And give his book a try. I think you're going to enjoy it. All right, that's going to do it for this video. Good luck, Bobby, on your book sales. And we will see you on the next video. Thanks.